Welcome to the Leadercast podcast, a weekly deep dive into the stories that transformed our guests into leaders worth following. I'm your host, Joe Boyd. If you've been enjoying the podcast, thank you so much for being a listener. One simple thing you can do to help us out is give a review wherever you listen. Today's guest is absolutely no stranger to Leadercast. He has presented more than any other person on the Leadercast stage. He's the founder of North Point Ministries in Atlanta, Georgia. It's Andy Stanley. You're going to love this talk I have with Andy. He will talk about the famous Hollywood movie that inspired him to go on an adventure when he was younger. He is a self-described knucklehead in some of his stories, and he wanted to be Elton John. That's just what you're going to learn. You'll also learn a lot about the power of mentorship and who shaped him. You're going to love this. Andy Stanley, welcome to the Leadercast podcast. So happy to have you.
So happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You're always invited to everything we do. Most people think I work for you because you speak at Leadercast every year. So that's kind of fun. But you've been such a part of Leadercast through the years and always give us such great content and deliver for us. And I'm so grateful for our partnership and that continues here as I get to lead this thing. It's awesome to have you be a part of it.
Well, it's obviously a huge honor for me, and I'm just so grateful that you provided this extraordinary platform that's been created to let me talk about things I love to talk about, primarily leadership. So that's I was grateful as anybody else. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. Thank you. Okay, so for this, the folks that listen to it are kind of aware of it. I'm like a story theory nerd, and so a lot of this is based on kind of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, and just asking leaders. You have more content than anyone on our site, and people can go there and find all sorts of great advice and teachings. But for today, I wanted our community just to get to know you a little bit and how you became the leader and person you are. And we kind of use it as a framework where most of us, when we're younger, have that like feeling or that call to an adventure. We want to go, we have some ambition. We want to go do something. And we have this treasure we think we want. And oftentimes it represents even something deeper we need, but we don't know it yet. And then these dragons start to appear to stop us from getting the treasure. Usually mentors come along that help us along the way till eventually, more often than not, we kind of got sort of what we wanted, but in a totally different way is how it works out for a lot of us. So if you would, I personally don't know much about, I know who your dad is, but I don't know much about your childhood, or if we think of like a young Andy Stanley as a kid, when you think of being a kid, what kind of kid were you? What were you into? What were you like?
I was super shy. We lived in 2 or 3 places. My dad was a pastor, so we moved around a good bit when I was young. And one of the whole hero's journey paradigm or framework is so interesting. And one of the parts of that is sort of figuring out, projecting from childhood into adulthood or young adulthood, what you want to be, what you want to struggle with, what you want to overcome. And so one of the questions that I saw on your list was who was my mythical hero or childhood hero and that was a hard question. And the thing that came to mind, and I'm not going to tell you why because it's so strange, but I will tell you who was. I latched on to the character of Charlton Heston in the movie Ben-Hur, specifically around the chariot race scene, which I'm sure you are familiar with, but maybe not everybody watching or listening is familiar with. But that epic scene of the chariot race, as a kid, I would go out and take a wheelbarrow in our side yard in Miami, Florida, rock it back on the 2, handles with the tire out in the air, and stand in the back of the wheelbarrow with a trash can and a stick as my sword, and would play all by myself until it was dark, and my parents would have to call me in, and they would ask me, "Who are you playing with?" I'm like, "Nobody. Just I'm imagining that." And so as strange as that is, that was kind of the visual of overcoming and accomplishing and moving forward. Just that strange kind of battle conflict scene. So anyway, Yeah, I don't know what that means. Don't psychoanalyze my childhood, but
Oh,
that's
I
what kind of
want
stands out in terms of the
to.
story arc of the hero's journey,
Yeah.
because everybody has that to some extent.
Well, it certainly represents like what's in all of us is a mine was probably Luke Skywalker. I'm going to be a Jedi Knight, like there's you see an adventure story
Yeah.
and you want to be a part of an adventure and your normal world feels so boring and normal. You want to go do something great and amazing. Do you know that people were wearing wristwatches during that scene? Have you ever seen that?
No,
It's
I
like
did
a
not
great
know that.
it's like a classic movie that they forgot to take their watches off before they were
Oops.
yeah. Anyway,
Wow.
so obviously that was in you early on to kind of do that. I believe you early on. Did you want to be a pastor or go into ministry, or was that what were your
No.
first sort of career ambitions?
Well, one more little episode before that, if it's okay, because in terms of leadership, generally somebody plants a seed along the way, and so before I had any career ambition, when I was in Louis Giglio, who many of your listeners and viewers know, who's also a pastor here in Atlanta, we grew up together at my dad's church. And we were both such knuckleheads, to use an old phrase. There are more modern phrases I won't use. But when we were in middle school, we just were troublemakers, and we were trouble in our youth group. And we had a leader. Her name's Mary Gillerstedt. She's actually, I think Mary's 94 years old. And she was our youth pastor, as we called it back then. And one of the defining moments in this journey for me, I can remember where we were sitting. I was sitting next to Louis, and all the other students had left to go somewhere. It was on a Sunday morning, and we had just disrupted something again. And she sat us down. She kept us back, and she sat us down. And here's what she said. She said, "You boys are leaders, and I need you to lead." And I remember thinking, in fact, I may have said it. I don't know if I just thought it or said it. But I either thought or said, I don't want to be a leader. I just remember thinking, don't put that on me. I just want to goof off. I just want to be like every other middle school boy. But I can remember this conversation, her looking at both of us and saying, you boys are leaders. And Mary, if Louis were here, he would tell you, she, in spite of us, gave us opportunity after opportunity after opportunity until she kind of opportunityed us into leadership in our youth group through high school and through college. And she is still connected to both of us today. And, we're, according to her, two of her favorite people. And she's kind of like a spiritual mom. And in some ways, that was probably the first mentor figure in my life, and probably in Louis as well, because somebody who saw something in us and called it out of us, even at that age, which is remarkable. And I have some pictures of Louis and I in that season of our lives. And I keep one on my credenza in my office from when we were 16 years old. And on a couple of occasions when I've had parents in my office, this is years ago, bemoaning what's happening to my kids, I would say, "See that picture?" And they're like, "Is that you?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's me and Louis Giglio." And I'm saying, "See, there's hope for your kids. Look at those guys. They look like they, crawled off the street." So anyway, the story arc of somebody recognizing something in us, recognizing it, naming it, calling it out. And then when there's the opportunity to kind of funnel us with opportunities into a direction, everybody listening and watching has an opportunity to do that with someone. And when we do that with a person, we become part of their story in a significant way, because mentorship is not generally formal anyway. It's something that just happens, in terms of people's lives colliding. So way before I had any career ambitions, Mary planted that seed in both of us, and then just funneled us in a direction of responsibility that I think neither one of us really wanted at the time.
You know what I love, when you're in the leadership circle and like you lead a pretty big organization, you have a lot of influence in the world. It's just interesting to think of all the people that you and Louis have touched through the years in positive ways. And I don't know how to say it. It's almost like it's to her credit in a sense. I think sometimes we feel like we can feel like all I've really ever done is just helped a few people here and there, but it's exponential, right? Nobody's probably keeping score, but it's nice to realize that sometimes it can be those moments with an eighth grader that ends up having major impact on the world.
Yeah. I mean, every person we know that's doing something amazing, somebody raised them, somebody spoke into them, taught them, coached them, guided them, headed them off at the path before they did something that would have sent them in a completely different direction in their life. So it happens all the time. Oftentimes it's accidental, but it can be intentional. And I think everybody has that responsibility for somebody.
Yeah. And calling it out, it's also very, Leadercast is a place for people of all faiths and no faith, but obviously some of us come from a similar tradition, and it's almost like a biblical thing to sort of call someone out and to have a blessing, right? It's kind of the Bible thing, is like you say you are going to be this is who you're going to be, and that's real. That stuff works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so, and I know, so your dad is still a preacher, pastor, and I'm always curious when people end up in the family business per se, because I don't think you were thinking that early on. So could you go ahead and talk a little bit about that pathway?
I wanted to be a musician, and I there's so many stories connected to that. And my dad did not appreciate my music. I learned to play the guitar, and I guess I was in 7th or 8th grade. And then I discovered that there were chords on a piano as well as chords on a guitar. So I taught myself to play the piano. And, from a distance, everything I played sounded the same. I'm sure that's what my dad told me. It all sounds the same. My mom was very musical, and consequently, she could tell, no, he's not playing the same thing. It just sounds like he is. And I would literally break strings on our piano, banging so hard. I discovered Elton John early and decided I wanted to be Elton John or Peter Frampton. I had the Peter Frampton hair, but I love playing the piano. So that's really what I wanted to do, and played in bands in high school, and I wrote music, and that was kind of the direction I was going in. And then in college, I realized, as many people do, I was not quite as good as I thought I was. There's another whole story that goes with that. At the same time, at that time that I was working I was working with the media ministry in my dad's church all those years ago. Got super interested in that. Loved anything that had a wire, connected to it, putting things together. And through that, just began doing other things in ministry, and was always bothered by, and this kind of goes back to the story arc a little bit. Always bothered by people who made stupid decisions and messed up their own lives. Seemed ridiculous to me. And ridiculous in a judgmental way. I'm not saying I was super healthy with this, but I just couldn't understand, why would somebody make a decision that is going to mess up their life? And it was so obvious even to me in college, this is not going to go well. And I think that became more of a burden and a concern than simply me standing back and judging everybody's life. And that became a thread as well in terms of what shaped what I do now and my passion for ministry. So I started working with high school students, and I was the one-man band. I would lead worship, put down my guitar, pick up my Bible, and teach, and did a lot of Bible studies in homes. And then another defining moment for me in terms of this whole mentor, recognize, speak into.
Yeah.
I was a junior in college, probably a junior in college. I was in a home leading, 15 kids sitting on a floor in somebody's home. And it was a different home than we normally met in. And after I finished speaking to these, 15 high school kids sitting on the floor in a living room, we were in the kitchen, and the woman who lived there, it was her home. Her name's Helen Hurd. She said to me, she said, "Andy, you really have a gift for teaching." This was like a defining moment. She recognized something, and she said it to me, and then she went about whatever it was she was doing, and it stuck. And you'll think I'm making this up. Probably, let's see, if I was, say I was 20, 30, 40, 15 years later, sitting in church, one Sunday after, well, it's longer than that. We'd started North Point. I'm sitting in church one Sunday about to go up and preach. And there's a woman, she tapped me on the shoulder. She said, hi, because I didn't remember her name. It was just whatever, the woman whose home we were in. She said, hi, Andy, I'm Helen Hurd. You probably don't remember me, but you taught a Bible study in my home in Peachtree City. And I stopped her. I'm like, this is what I said. I said, you called me into the ministry. And she said, what? I said, and I quoted back to her what she said standing in her kitchen, and she doesn't even remember saying it. I'm saying, I'm telling you, I have told that story, but I could not remember your name. And we've, stayed connected ever since. So once again, somebody seeing something, naming it and saying it just in passing, for me was a significant moment. And again, we all have those opportunities, and we're either speaking life into people, or we're speaking death into people. We're speaking potential, or we're speaking, hey, good luck, it's probably not going to work out for you. And we don't think about it, but we all have that opportunity. So between Mary Gillerstadt, telling Louie and I, you are leaders and you're going to lead whether you like it or not, and Helen Hurd saying, just that simple statement, you really have a gift for communication. That sent me, on a trajectory to teach and to lead. So, it's part of the story.
I love it. This also preaches. I feel like we're writing a sermon right here. Maybe you've done it before, but I'm loving the points. Do you find yourself, I'm sure, well, day to day, do you find yourself even thinking of those women? Or I guess what I'm trying to say is, do you consciously have moments where you think this would be a great opportunity for me to speak into someone? Like, is it that sort of like
it absolutely is, because, and they were, again, nobody, in those moments, they had no idea. In fact, maybe Helen said that to everybody that came into her home and left. Right. I don't know. So absolutely. And so I find myself, when somebody does a really good job or has a real skill, I find myself naturally not trying to, be special, but it is very natural for me to say, you know what, you are really good at that. You are, because who knows, it might be the thing that gives somebody either the courage to pursue something they wouldn't normally pursue, or, just that extra point of motivation they need to stick with something they're considering giving up. So
I think a lot of times we don't realize, I think most of us go through not totally aware of the people in our life, hoping we will just see and notice them. You know what I mean? No matter whether we have a leadership ability or not. I had a crazy other life in improv comedy with the Second City. And when someone that I thought was really great at improv would stop me and say, hey, you're pretty good at this, they had no idea how much it meant to me, because I wasn't sure. So right. We have that opportunity every day as we go along. That's such a great reminder, man. Okay, so if you could you talk about, we used the idea of dragons, so could you talk a little bit about, as you began to realize what your sort of life calling was, calling into ministry, what were your early sort of visions of what it might look like when you were successful, and what, if anything, started to stand in the way of that? What dragons did you have to face?
Well, I knew you were going to ask this question, and it's a great question. And part of it, I'm hesitant to share, but I'll share some of it. And because the point is that there's always that. So the first so when I finished seminary and came to work for my dad, I was going to go to Baylor University and get my PhD, and I didn't get accepted in the program. So then it was like, oh no, what am I going to do? So there was an opening at my dad's church. And so they hired me for the summer. And I ended up staying 10 years working with high school students, which was, a wonderful season of life, but it was kind of accidental. A failure resulted in something terrific. I would have never met Sandra, my wife. I mean, there's so many things when that's a lesson in and of itself. But one of the biggest, the first obstacle I ran into is I had a vision for what I wanted to do in terms of creating an environment that high school students would love to be a part of. And it ran up against everything traditional in our Southern Baptist church. And I'm sure that if I had not been the pastor's son, I would have been fired 3 or 4 or 5 times within that 10 years because of things I tried. And I was stubborn and a little bit rebellious. And I knew this is what needed to be done, in spite of the fact that they didn't think I should do it. So I was not always careful. I was not always diplomatic. I do wish I could go back and and do some of that over. But I was confident if you would just give me the money and give me the opportunity to create an environment, more high school students will come, because an environment is everything when it comes to teaching and preaching or sharing or trying to get people to change. So I was all about the environment. So I found myself in conflict with the powers that be within the context of our church. And I hate to characterize them as dragons, because they were wonderful people who were doing wonderful things the way they had always been done, which is, typical in any industry, not just church world. So I had to learn to be more gracious, more patient. But those were, I would go home so frustrated, that whole thing. Why can't they get it? Why can't they see things the way I see things? But the takeaway for me as a leader was this. And as I say this, there are staff in this room helping me record this, so they may roll their eyes. I hope not. The takeaway for me from all that, one of them was this: I don't ever want to be the type of boss or leader that sends people home frustrated day after day after day after day because I won't listen, or I'm not open to things that I can't control and that I don't understand. Because we all naturally resist anything we don't understand and can't control. That's what we always resist. That if I don't understand it, if I can't control it, something in me resists it. That's human nature. But when a leader gets caught up in that, they basically put a lid on their leadership, and they put a lid on their entire organization. And I so don't want to be that leader, but that is in me like it's in everybody. So once again, navigating the obstacles of a traditional church with a non-traditional approach to doing student ministry and potential, and in particular, that was an initial bump. And there were others along the way. And one of the others was a theme, and this is where I don't want to go into too much detail. There was a theme in my life of mentors failing, and watching men in particular that I looked up to and that had taken time to pour into me, watching them as the years went by fail, in some cases morally, in some cases just losing their faith. I mean, there's a variety of stories. That was extremely disappointing and disheartening. It just, when somebody you look up to and you feel like, where would I be without that person? And then they go off and make, some crazy decision. Those were difficult moments as well. But again, mentors are mentors, and people come and people go. And at some point we have to just figure out, hey, what are we supposed to do? And there are, to my opinion, there probably should not be mentors for our entire lives. There are generally mentors who drop in a season of our life, who speak into our lives in that season, because they're who we need in that season. So in terms of us pouring into other people, that's something to keep in mind. And in terms of, hey, people come, people go. And at some point you realize, I think I've learned everything I can from this particular person or from this particular group of people. So, that's another lesson in the story arc as well.
Yeah. As you think about where you are now, I would make an assumption a lot of your time is spent thinking around mentorship and maybe even succession of what you've helped create and build. I don't necessarily want to use the word older leader, but as where you are now,
older than some.
Yeah.
And I'm an older than some leader.
That's correct. But did you notice a shift when it became a little less about your vision and ambition maybe, and a little more about what's next? Have you gone through that sort of maybe transition to becoming more of a mentor yourself in your mind?
What's next for our organization, or what do you mean exactly?
I guess the people you're leading or the organization, in terms of, I think of this for any dynamic leader, there always comes a moment when I think we realize this is going to go beyond me. And so when you start to realize that, I'm just curious, have you had that realization, and then how do you sort of process it?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think most of us don't have that realization early enough. Yeah. But yeah, I think about that. Sandra and I, my wife and I, talk about that all the time in terms of what's next, not just personally, but what's next for our organization. And, if success is when the leader or the founder steps out and things go better than before. That's success. And I certainly want that to be the case for our organization. So I think about that, constantly, especially over the last, 5 years. So yeah, that's a really big deal. And mentorship obviously it's not the whole thing, but that's certainly a part of it because it takes people to do great things, not just, organizations don't even exist. People exist and people do things and do great things. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Well, I want to ask you just a couple specific questions. They may not have been on your list. I know you love to prepare, and I appreciate that about you very much. But I think these are softballs a little bit. I think of you as one of the best communicators that I've ever heard. And I've probably heard you communicate more outside of the church environment because I've mainly heard you in leadership conferences, though I've heard you at church some. And at the Leadercast, our most recent one, you talked about how important it is to find those 1, 2, or 3 things that you are really great at, or that your gift is to the world, basically, and focus on those and not try to be the leader that does everything.
Right.
In terms of being a good communicator as it applies to leadership, was that innate mainly for you? And then I assumed you also worked on it. Like, if I put you in the category of a leader who's also a great communicator, could you talk a little bit about what that was like for you to become that sort of leader, and how you think about communication as it relates to leadership? Maybe not the best question in the world, but I'd love to think about how those things intersect.
Well, this is a big topic. So I guess the short version is leaders, there are multiple avenues through which the leadership gift can be expressed, and speaking or public speaking is one. Yeah. So I'm naturally good at that, apparently. I mean, and in terms of my skill sets, that's the thing I'm best at. I feel like I am far better at talking about leadership than actually leading. And the reason I say that, I'm not trying to be humble. I'm surrounded with some extraordinary leaders, and I sit in meetings sometimes and think, I don't know why I'm in charge. And then I remember why I'm in charge. I'm in charge because I got here first. That's the only reason I'm in charge of this organization. So I feel like I'm better at talking about it, and being able to condense content and to summarize insights than I am actually leading. The point of all that is this: for leaders who are listening, if public speaking is not your thing, don't try to make it your thing. You got to figure out what your thing is and be the best at your thing. And of course, at times you have to speak publicly. At the same time, I have to sit in organizational meetings and help create organization or bring organizational structure out of chaos. It is not my highest and best gift at all. But at times I've got to at least participate in those meetings. But if I pivoted from, I'm going to quit speaking publicly or casting vision or, and just spend more time trying to become a better organizational leader in terms of the complexities of systems and all those things, I would never thrive there. It's just not the way I'm wired. Yeah. So for the leader who is natural and comfortable and gets feedback that says, hey, he or she, you're really good at that, then lean into that and leverage your public speaking as a form of leading. But if that's not your thing, do it when you have to, but figure out, if you're a strategic thinker, then you just need to lean into strategic thinking, because that's going to be your greatest contribution to your organization. So one last thing on that. I had never spoken on the topic of leadership. I'd never even considered speaking on the topic of leadership. Until many years ago, we hosted a conference here, and John Maxwell was going to be part of the conference. It was his conference. We were just hosting it. It was the first Catalyst conference, actually. And he said, Andy, I want you to speak on leadership. And I'm like, why would I speak on leadership when John Maxwell's going to be here speaking on leadership? And so I said, okay. And so I came up with my first leadership talk. And I realized, I'm a good public speaker, And now I'm going to use that to leverage leadership content. And that really was my introduction. And whenever I'm around John or whenever I have the opportunity to see him, I always tell him, John, you basically created this category for me in my mind, because I'd never heard many people or anybody really talk about leadership. And then you, again, once again, just like Mary Gillerstedt all those years ago, you invited me into this opportunity and gave me an assignment that became really in some ways a career path for me that I guess I would have stumbled onto it at some point. But John is the one who, again, created that category in my mind, because that's what he does, then gave me an opportunity to do that. And I realized, oh, I can marry my leadership skill with my public speaking skill and talk about leadership. So that's how it happened for me. And I think the pattern is probably the same for most people, but the specifics are always going to be different.
I love that. And it actually feeds into the last question. And I'm supposed to think of a silly question. I'll be working on that while you talk a little, but I was a pastor at a couple of mega churches as well, teaching pastor, and that was the career path I was always supposed to have. And life threw me curveballs, and it makes sense to the job I have now. And I actually really enjoy leading an organization that can use issues of faith and people of faith and different faiths to learn how to be better leaders together. But I do think in the world we live in, increasingly more so, sometimes it's tricky to be a faith leader and then be asked to speak outside of that environment. Right. And you just do it. I mean, you're not here just so I can say that you're great, but you do that so well. Like you really do have a way to not minimize what your faith is, but to communicate to people of all different faiths. Could you talk a little bit about how you think about that and how you process that for those of us that maybe struggle with it, trying to find that line?
Yep. Yeah. I would love to talk about that. Again, it's a big topic. Yeah. But here's the thing. My worldview as a Christian is summarized by what John, the apostle, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, who wrote the fourth gospel, who spent 3 to 3.5 years with Jesus. I mean, that's amazing. Forget religion, forget the Bible. Just historically, here's a man who spent 3 to 3.5 years, and he was probably 20 years old when this started, with Jesus, and lived to be a very, very, very old man in terms of, what was old for first century. And he tells us, based on his time with Jesus and his life experience, which was horrible toward the end, that God is love. So as a Christian, if that's what I'm convinced is true, then my framework for who I accept and who I'm concerned about and who I love and who I'm responsible for and who I want to see succeed is pretty much everybody. So I just don't feel any inclination to differentiate in terms of who I'm talking to and what I'm talking about and how important it is for them. So that's kind of the big framework. And then the other thing that I think that makes this simple for me, again, in my worldview, we all have far more in common than we do different. There is virtually nothing different about any human being compared to any other human being when you take in all the factors. We think we're all so different. We are not. I mean, biologically, we're the same. Chemically, we're the same. We all wake up in the morning and want to raise our kids and keep our jobs and pay our bills and have some happiness and some joy and have something to leave our kids. And, there's so much sameness. So when it comes to communicating, there is so much to begin with in terms of common ground. So those two ideas are a framework that I think make it simple because, again, we all have so much in common. And I would hope that a person from a different faith or no faith would hear me speak about leadership and walk away thinking, you know what, that was helpful. I can use that. And I like that guy. That's it. Because influence is, we never want to give up influence unnecessarily. And I hope that speaking to business leaders and speaking in a business context or marketplace context would give me greater influence. And because people know I'm a pastor and they know I'm a Christian, that's because of what I do. I don't have to announce that. In fact, in some cases, I've been in business environments corporate environments where I knew it was a bit of a negative, and I knew it was something I was going to have to overcome. And there was a sense of, why is he here? I get that. I mean, unfortunately, people who do what I do, we have earned in some ways that reputation. People should be a bit, cautious. So, so that's something to have to overcome. And I'm just happy that I have the opportunity to help overcome that in the minds of some people. So thanks for asking.
Oh, yes. Thanks for answering. I brought one of my very close friends is a devout Muslim, and I brought him to Leadercast a couple years ago, and he's an author, like a very, very smart guy. And I said, he's like, I loved it, Joe. This is so awesome. I was like, who's your favorite? He's like, Andy Stanley. I was like,
The pastor.
Well, I said the pastor. He's like, did he say he was a pastor? I didn't know he was a pastor. I was like, yeah. And he's like, I don't care what he believes. I learned more from him than I've ever learned from anyone. So then that made me proud because of your standing firm in who you are, but being able to have your love be your goal and your focus. Was able to interview Father Richard Rohr for the last Leadercast, and I basically asked him straight up, I'm the young man climbing the mountain to talk to the old sage. What's the secret to life? And he didn't hesitate. He said it's love. Love is the engine of life, and it's the goal. And I think all of us need to hear that as leaders. So, Andy, one final question: if the history of the world depended on it, and you had to play one rock and roll song with your guitar right now, what is the one rock and roll song that you would want to play?
Oh, wow.
A rock song to change the world.
To change the world? Oh,
Save the
okay.
world.
I'm glad you clarified. To change the world. Oh gosh, you should have asked me that. You should have put that on the list. I'd have to give that.
The last question
thought.
never goes on the list, and I'm sorry. I know you hate that.
Yeah, no, that's actually a good question though. And everything that comes to mind in my mind right now seems so trite. I wouldn't dare answer out loud. Yeah.
How about one that you could sing and get through?
No, I don't want to do that either. I can't sing anymore. I'm so glad I did not stick with music. Okay, that my career would have been short and shallow. So anyway, but I still love music. So
all right,
think about that.
I'll let you off the hook. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, so much fun, Joe. Look forward to seeing you soon.